Powered by Righteous Media.
Welcome to Independent Americans. Welcome to episode 337. And welcome to June in New York City, around the country, and around the world. I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. And even though the rain of May and April has finally subsided, and the sunshine and warm weather is finally here, even now, and especially this summer, is most definitely a time to stay vigilant. The playoffs may be finally over for my New York Knicks in a heartbreaking fashion, but our ongoing Meet the Independent Candidate series is not. And as we launch into baseball season, we're going to continue to bring you some of the most important, innovative, and inspiring independent candidates and electeds from across the country. And that continues this week with the independent mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee, Tim Kelly. That's coming up, and it's a really smart, dynamic, fast-moving conversation with a guy you've maybe never heard of, but you'll probably hear a lot more of in the days to come, so stay tuned for that. But before we get to Mayor Tim Kelly of Chattanooga, Tennessee, there are a few top topics that we've got to hit on that are hotter than the July and August weather to come. Topics that are especially at the intersection between national security, politics, and defense that I'm always keeping an eye on. So the waters out there are not still like the waters behind me. They are getting rough and will get rougher still. So here they are, my top topics. First up, ding dong, the asshole's gone. By now, you've surely heard that Elon Musk is out at the White House. He's leaving Washington, D.C. with a new title. He's been founder, he's been a visionary, he's been called a lot of things, but now one thing is certain. He's leaving Washington with a new title. The man who has fired more veterans than any other person in the history of America. In just a 6-month period, he's fired thousands of veterans, more than almost anybody I can imagine in recent memory, and jump-started a new movement of resistance, not just against him, but against DOGE and the federal cuts that are happening nationwide in all kinds of agencies, and sparked a response. This Friday in Washington, D.C., thousands of veterans will unite for the Unite for Veterans rally. They will stand up to oppose the federal cuts that have been happening from DOGE and Elon Musk. They will oppose the cuts to VA benefits. They will oppose the cuts to Veterans Affairs. So if you're in Washington this Friday, 2 o'clock, go to the National Mall and hook up with thousands of your fellow veterans of all backgrounds, and you'll get to see a concert from the Dropkick Murphys, which is a pretty awesome group that stands up for a lot of good causes. So whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or, of course, an independent, go down to the D.C. Mall or check out any one of the shadow rallies that are happening across the country as veterans continue to unite to stand up for our values and each other. You never know what you're going to see in America and in New York City. I'm in lower Manhattan again, not far from the Statue of Liberty, and through those trees, I don't know if you could see it, is a cruise ship. But you never know what you're going to see in New York, and you never know what you're going to see in politics nowadays, and especially around the Pentagon under Radical Secretary Pete Hegseth. The latest surprise is a new, highly political, highly partisan recruiting ad for the military that features he himself, Pete Hegseth. I can't remember ever seeing any Secretary of Defense in a military recruiting ad. I can't ever remember a president, but Trump's in it too. But check this out. It's a highly political, highly partisan example of how they are continuing to weaponize the military in ways that are absolutely unprecedented and I would argue unacceptable. Check this out.
No more distractions. No more electric tanks. No more gender confusion. No more climate change worship. We are laser focused on our mission of warfighting.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into. It's called peace through strength.
You look into the eyes of these young Americans who are giving up the best years of their life in a uniform to serve their nation. They are incredible.
Through our power and might, we will lead the world to peace. Our friends will respect us, our enemies will fear us, and the whole world will admire the unrivaled greatness of the United States military. We will replenish the pride of our armed forces, end the recruitment crisis.
We don't fight because we hate what's in front of us. We fight because we love what's behind us.
God bless you. God bless our armed forces. God bless our men and women serving overseas. And God bless the United States of America.
And because we'll continue to hold national security and veterans leaders especially accountable, there's more chaos happening at the Pentagon. From the radical extremists and partisans who brought you the Department of Defense's attack on Jackie Robinson and the attempted erasure of Jackie Robinson, we now have more news. It seems that Pete Hegseth and his berry band of extremists now want to remove the name of legendary gay rights activist and Navy veteran Harvey Milk from a Navy ship. And they're doing it during Pride Month. It's not unintentional. It's another extremely political move that is an attack on another minority group, now the LGBTQ community, during Pride Month. And it's followed by an attack that will attempt to change the names of other Navy ships named after Medgar Evers, Harriet Tubman, and other civil rights leaders. Now, it is unprecedented to unname a ship that has already been named. It thrusts extreme politics into the Navy and into our military. And it's also bad luck. Most Navy folks will tell you changing the name of a ship is a bad idea. But this is another example of the ongoing culture war that they're waging at the Pentagon. They're banning trans people. They're attacking women's rights. They're banning books. And now they're trying to erase history. We can't let them. We must stay focused. We must push back, especially for minority communities that are being uniquely and consistently targeted. And especially during Pride Month, those attacks will continue. And we must all, as Americans, unite and support and defend our fellow Americans. Because equal rights is as American as it gets. And that's what Pride is really all about. It's about equal rights for everyone. It started out as a march, and now it's a movement. And that movement has gained equal rights for gay and trans people that are now attempting to be rolled back by political extremists like Pete Hegseth. And as always, the most effective attacks and defenses against these attacks won't come from liberals. They won't come from the Democratic Party. They will come from moderates. They will come from independents. And they will come from you. Our next top topic. And it's noteworthy that this is a top topic and not below the radar. Ukraine has got tremendous momentum right now. Coming off the minerals deal, which was a significant step forward. Coming off some softening from Trump and others on their language towards Ukraine. This week, we saw the most spectacularly successful and innovative attack maybe in the entire Ukraine war and maybe in a generation. As thousands of Ukrainian drones were smuggled in container trucks into Russia to be deployed and attack and defeat and dismantle and destroy 41 Russian long-range bombers. It's kind of like a Pearl Harbor for Ukraine and one of the most spectacular and impressive military operations in modern history. Ukraine has got Putin on his heels, and now is the time to continue the pressure. And we've also seen other progress. As I've noted before, there is now bipartisan agreement on an increased sanctions bill on Russia, a long overdue sanctions bill that's being bolstered by a recent trip to Ukraine by Republican Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Democrat Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. The two of them visited Ukraine. They visited with Zelensky, and they plan to introduce the sanctions legislation on Russia in the next few weeks. When they do, We will call on every single American elected official to support it and finally stand with Ukraine and continue the momentum so this can be the tipping point summer for the war in Ukraine, where Russia will be defeated, Putin will be demoralized, and Ukraine will be victorious. Watch this space, folks, because it's picking up steam. It's no longer below the radar. It is truly a top topic, and it's an area where we must all stay vigilant. Slava Ukraine. As we talk about regularly on this show, the Republicans have taken themselves off a cliff, and many Americans with them. And the Democrats won't save us. This is a time for independents especially to rise to the challenge. But this month, June, is also a time for primaries around the country. And maybe the most high visibility one is the one here in New York City for mayor. But I was on my way to drop my kids off at school today. And while I was there, outside of my school was campaigning a local Democrat city councilman named Chris Marte, who seems like a pretty decent guy, and he was out there asking for my vote. There's one problem. I can't vote. This month, there is a publicly funded private primary for only Democrats and Republicans that I can't vote in, along with 1 million other New Yorkers. And this is true all across the country. This month, they will have public funds, our tax dollars, publicly funding a private primary happening at our public schools using public resources and public people to execute a private primary that we can't vote in. Veterans like me, first responders like me, and hundreds of thousands of others here in New York City that make up almost 50% of the voting public cannot vote in this primary. It's wrong. It's undemocratic. It's un-American, and it's bullshit. That's why this November, we hope to see a ballot initiative on the ballot in November in New York City that will finally call for open primaries here in New York City. And it's not just New York City. There are primaries happening around the country, primaries where independents like us cannot vote. That's why we must continue to push for open primaries nationwide, in places like Maryland, after victories in places like New Mexico. There is a national movement to finally level the playing field for all voters and make sure that everybody has an equal say in our democracy. And it's not just about independence. Republicans and Democrats, this impacts you too. If you want a fairer, better, stronger democracy, then support open primaries. There's no middle ground on this. Either you're with independents or you're against us. So the initiative to let us vote is more critical now than ever before. Our movement is growing, and it will require systems change, process change, but it will also require leadership. Leaders who can break through, leaders who can communicate, leaders who can inspire. That's why I will continue to bring you candidates and elected officials who are independent, people you might not hear from anywhere else other than on this show. Recently, we talked to Jim Walden, independent candidate for New York City mayor. We talked to the mayor of Colorado Springs, another independent, Yemi Mobolade. And in this episode, we are continuing our Meet the Independent series with the independent mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee, Tim Kelly. He's a brilliant guy, a smart guy, and an effective guy. He won 4 years ago on a simple idea of uniting Chattanooga. He also ran on fixing potholes and getting things done, and we're going to talk more about that. But Tim Kelly is a guy you maybe haven't heard of, but I hope you will hear more of in the days to come. He is an innovative leader. He is an effective leader. He is a uniter, and he represents the best of what our independent movement is all about. The sun is setting here in New York City right now on a beautiful summer night. But the sun is also setting on our broken politics. The sun is setting on the two-party duopoly that has dominated our politics for far too long. The sun is setting on Democrats and Republicans being the only people who have a place at the table in our democracy. And the sun is rising on our independent movement because of leaders like Mayor Tim Kelly. So welcome to a summer of independent hope. Welcome to a conversation with a man who represents the future of our movement, not just for Chattanooga, but for America. Welcome to June. Welcome to Independent Americans, episode 337. Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, we are now into June, and one of the most dynamic, interesting, stressful, invigorating summers is before us. In the midst of all the fire, we're going to try to bring you voices of calm and cool that can add light to contrast the heat. And I'm very happy to be continuing our Meet the Independent Candidate and Elected series following last week with Mayor Yemi Mobolade. Joining us now, the great and powerful mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Mayor Tim Kelly is here on Independent Americans. Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here. It's an honor.
It's great to finally have you on the show. We've talked a number of times. We have mutual friends, and I'm just really inspired by what you're doing and excited to get into all of it. But let's start with, where are you and how are you, Mr. Mayor?
I'm doing great. Chattanooga's a great city and a great spot. There's definitely more travel involved with the job than I thought. I was just out at Google I/O. We're doing a lot of work on municipal AI there, and was in Bentonville, Arkansas. We won an award for being a secret sauce city, in Bentonville. But I'm back in the saddle here, and we got budget coming up. We got a reading tonight, so it's back to the grind.
There's a lot of cool stuff you're doing in Chattanooga. I think can be a model for America, especially as an independent. But can you start for folks who maybe don't know you? I want to do my part to help elevate your profile nationally, because I think what you're doing is so informative and important. But you've done everything from sell cars to bring in a professional soccer team. You were an established leader in the community. Why'd you first get into politics? Why'd you want to jump in and become mayor of the city you love?
Well, I'd be shocked if anybody knew anything about me. Chattanooga's like number 100 on the MSA ranking list, but it is an interesting story, I think, or it has found to a lot of people, in that I never ran for student council, never thought of myself as getting into politics or running for mayor. But Chattanooga's had a long history of good mayors and had passed the baton along. And, I'm a big Rotary Club guy here in town, which I've come to understand is a really important part of a city's social and cultural fabric. And, when Trump got elected in 2016, it bothered me a lot, not politically as much as just culturally, because, just don't like the guy's leadership style and the way he treats people. And I just thought it was kind of poisonous. And, it went against everything I ever learned about leadership. I came from a military family. It was just completely antithetical. It was a shocking moment. And I read a book by a guy named Bruce Katz called The New Localism. And this book, the thesis of this book is essentially that cities have more power now than they've ever had, because of these revolutions in finance and technology, to really, shape the lives of their residents. And if you peel that onion, you'll find, cities are the engines of GDP. They're the engines of innovation. They are arguably our greatest human invention. And so it became a kind of a haven for me mentally, right? Like, that was the first time I thought, well, and then there were some folks that I knew that said, you should run for mayor. And I remember distinctly thinking it was a shocking suggestion, because it just wasn't comfortable public speaking. Just like, I'm not doing that. I've got 7 businesses I'm running. I started the soccer club here. I did all this stuff. But eventually, I think it was Stephen King who once said, the only reason to write a book is because you can't not write it, because it's like in you and it has to get out. I became concerned that Chattanooga would go the wrong way if the wrong person got elected. And I had a moment with myself where I realized I had to get over my fears and insecurities about speaking and failure and all that, and just said, I got to do it, or I'm not going to be able to forgive myself. And so I was like the proverbial dog that caught the car it was chasing, and I won. I just treated the campaign like a startup and assembled a really bipartisan team, and it's a nonpartisan race here in Chattanooga. And so, here I am. Just finished my first term, got elected to a second term pretty resoundingly. So, and I'm really enjoying the work. I believe my thesis is true, and I do believe independence and now kind of this nonpartisan approach is more important than ever.
That's why I got you here, because I think we agree, and most of the folks listening will agree, and many more will agree, I think, by the end of this discussion, because you are at the epicenter of everything from technology innovation to immigration to sports and culture. And I want to go deeper into all of that. Yep. But you did just get reelected for a second term, overwhelming victory. People know you now in that city, and now increasingly across the country. Can I ask you, in this moment especially, can you help define how you consider yourself independent? What do you define as independent? What does it mean right now in this political environment especially? And what was what was the key to your success being elected the first time and being elected the second time? You're bringing diverse groups together. You're tackling crime and some hard issues as well. You're not afraid to say what you think about Trump. But how do you define independent, and what was the key to your success just in getting elected in the first place?
Well, in some ways, I have to thank Trump in that what he showed me, one of the angles there was that, like, if this guy can do it just by being himself and being authentic, right? Then I can do it. Like, I haven't lived a perfect life. I think post the Gary Hart years back in the 80s, everybody thought, well, hey, you got to be the Pope to get elected to anything. And nobody wants their personal life. Not that I've been some, cad. I mean, I actually, relative to a lot of politicians, have a pretty clean and boring life. But that at the same, as much as I disagree with his leadership style, I saw something in that, and so I owe a debt of gratitude in that regard, because I do think that disruptive aspect is really important. And I think the lesson there is really, really clear in retrospect. I was just talking to my son about this, relative to the last national election. People clearly prefer imperfect authenticity to perfect inauthenticity, right? Like, you're better off being yourself and being real and tackling problems practically. People get that. They relate to that. And, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a problem solver. It's not more complicated than that. There's also this really interesting, when you talk about what it means to be independent, it just means to be a good critical thinker, right? And call it like you see it. And I'm not a tribal person. I read another book I read that made a big impact on me was The Righteous Mind. And that book, the author's name escapes me at the moment, but Jonathan Haidt. But he I think, looks at politics through the lens of cultural anthropology. And so many people just get trapped. Like, I'm a red jersey person. I can't possibly put on the blue jersey. The book that made the biggest impact on me in high school was George Orwell's 1984, right? And the human mind has this super unfortunate predilection for tribalism, for othering. And you got to be able to get over that and just call it like you see it and solve problems on the ground. Former Mayor of Pittsburgh once said that, there are really three political parties in the United States: Democrats, Republicans, and mayors. And because if you're going to be a good mayor, you have to be independent. You have to think. I've yet to meet a mayor in 4+ years that I can guess their political affiliation from a 15-minute conversation with them.
I think that's a really helpful way for people to understand how you approach this. It seems, at least nationally, it's Democrats, Republicans, and none of the above. And you're checking on a lot of those none of the aboves and bringing them together. But you also, Mr. Mayor, you put forth a vision, right? And I think this was important. Can you talk about One Chattanooga? You put forward this idea of a vision for what you wanted Chattanooga to look like, that also required you to get shit done, right? You have to be an effective operator. You have to be able to execute. Your business experience fueled that. But talk about how you came together with that idea for One Chattanooga and how it's going.
Yeah, thank you. So I spent a lot of time, obviously, here, mainly in the business world, but came from a family where, both my parents did a lot of philanthropic work, and in a small, or a mid-sized city like this, like a lot of cities across the country, you do philanthropic work. It's expected of you. You just do it, right? Boys club, girls club, food bank, all that, right? And I did it. And as I went on, I became more involved. The businesses got easier. It's kind of a cut and print thing. When you started a business, it gets easier. You learn to delegate, you learn to manage. And my heart kind of shifted more towards the community, and doing philanthropic work. And I wound up as a chairman of the Community Foundation here. And again, look, I'm not a political guy. I'm more of if I have a theory of change, it's economic. But I saw the gaps between the white community and the black community here were just grotesque, like really grotesquely large, both in terms of income and net worth. And this is not about, charity for the black community. It's certainly not about political patronage. It's about solving a problem. Divided economies don't work. They don't work. So it's about, at the end of the day, that what we're going through now, this demonization of equity, and is so ridiculous, because it's just about access and opportunity. That's all. And like making people's lives better, giving them the opportunity, giving them the tools that they need, whether that's through education or workforce development, to become more productive and happy, residents. It's not a political exercise to me. anyway. So that really is the core of the One Chattanooga plan. I will say the other part, though, that kind of puts me in weird political territory, because a lot of people think I'm a Republican for this, is a focus on efficient and effective government. We ran on filling potholes, and I think that's kind of caught on. You hear that more and more now.
Yeah.
And at the time I did that.
Literally filling potholes.
Literally filling potholes.
Right,
Literally
yeah.
filling potholes.
Yeah.
Because the thing is this, if you can't do that, if you can't do the simple stuff right, why in the hell would anybody trust you to do anything more than that? Right? And so there's a difference between legislative political fitness, and this is back to the prior point, and executive political fitness. I look at this as a 2,600 person service delivery organization, and it has to run like one. And the axiomatic problem with government, sounds like a very Republican thing to say, but it's just the truth, is that we have no competition. And so we don't have that low boil of a competitor behind us saying, well, if you don't do better, I'm out. We actually do. If you run I've gotten quite a few people here from New Orleans, with apologies to Mayor Cantrell. If things aren't going well in the city, people will move. We've gotten quite a few residents coming in here from other places, but city government doesn't feel that. So unless you are really demonstrative as a CEO, and our model is a strong mayor model, and I have to be that way, it's a shockingly uncommon insight, I think, but it's nonetheless true.
I like this idea of the strong mayor model, right? Because I think that's going to be tested, especially under Trump, in the next couple of months, as he continues to challenge and attack and support mayors, a la carte almost. But let's drill down to one of those issues in specific that I think you've been able to get points on the board in an area where it seems like mayors can't. You're actually building housing. Right, you're tackling housing. I saw you've got a plan now for roughly 11,000 new housing units, and what do you got, like 200,000 people in Chattanooga, just a little bit below that? That's a lot of housing units. Can you talk about how you're able to do that, and how it could be a model for other cities that are facing this housing crunch too?
Well, again, I'm a big believer. Again, I see things very much through an executive lens, and so it's about talent. We got a lot of talented people. If I have one real salient talent, it's assembling great teams. And I got a woman who moved up from New Orleans named Nicole Heyman, who is our chief housing officer, now our chief policy officer. And man, she just went at it, and said, here's what needs to happen. We followed the blueprint. We got some things changed at the state legislature, which was a huge advantage in and of itself, by approaching it, I might add, from a nonpartisan direction. Not trying to paint Republicans in a corner and tell them why they were, dumb and didn't get it, but saying, like, look, police and firefighters and teachers can't afford to live in the city of Chattanooga. Not, the sort of typical approach from the left of guilting people into social policy, right? And we work with the market. Like, government does not, it's shocking to me still how many people think I can just reach into the, monopoly box and drop, the big red motels or houses out on the board. It doesn't work like that. You have to take a market-driven approach with affordable housing. So we've changed. We made ADUs by right, additional dwelling units. We did short-term vacation rental reform. That's a big deal, because the speculation of essentially turning residential units into commercial units has a lot to do with driving up the cost of housing. Again, we created
that means like Airbnb, right? Like tax
right.
Airbnb.
Yeah, that had a big impact. We have now created essentially a mezzanine debt fund to get deals penciled, so that if you're going to do affordable housing, frankly, the pro forma doesn't look as good as it does for pure for market housing. So we can provide some bridge debt to get deals done, and once they're done, they refi at a better valuation, at a lower rate, and we get our money back and go again. So it's a whole suite of tools that we're using to address the problem, and we're moving the needle. And the next step for us is doing something that Nashville's doing up the road, which is really working with our faith community to try to leverage all the surplus land that they've got, because they've got a lot, and they have, arguably all Christian churches should, but not all do, but a lot do have a heart for this work. And so there's definitely a part for the faith community to play here.
And I assume that allows you to bring in or build or create supportive housing options without the not in my backyard element, right? Which becomes always a factor in the cities, right?
Not in my backyard.
Everybody wants homeless people, but not in their off the streets, but not in their backyard, right?
Still a huge deal. It's a huge deal, and homelessness is kind of the other side of the coin from affordable housing. The two are inextricably related. But look, we're not immune to NIMBYism, but I would say we do a pretty good job of managing it because I think it has to do with how much time leadership in a city is spending on making people realize the humanity in each other and that we are in this ship together and that there is no other. I think part of the problem we really have not solved for across this country that we need to talk more about is this kind of interstate traffic in the homeless. It's definitely happening. Nobody really wants to hear that at the state level, the federal level, because people generally are fine with we will take care of our own or people from our footprint. But when people are getting shipped in from all over the place, and this is happening, the argument sort of comes apart. And again, it's this is not something that's being sufficiently addressed at the state or federal level.
I think there's a common theme if someone listens to you and listens to Mayor Yemi, the role that you're playing as a uniter, as a bridge builder, as a negotiator, right? And also, there's another focus that I think especially Democrats would be smart to understand. You're focused on public safety a lot, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you're talking about your new budget and how you're going to do pay increases for cops. Can you talk specifically about your approach to public safety, which is a national priority, but cities are feeling it first and being asked to respond maybe most quickly? How are you got the murder rate down? I think historic levels of low. How are you tackling public safety? Why are you choosing to increase the pay for cops? And here's the big question on all this: how are you going to pay for it? Right? Because a lot of folks who talk good game but can't pay for it. It sounds like you're able to do all of that. To lay that out for us, if you would, please.
Well, it's tough at the moment, but I mean, I will say when I ran the first time, I ran just after the George Floyd murder, and it was a really tough time here. And I didn't know much about policing or public safety. But I knocked on a lot of doors, and I can tell you, in the poorest neighborhoods, that I talked to, nobody wanted to defund the police. Nobody wanted to defund the police. Nobody was interested in that except a small group of generally white liberals who had it in. And I mean, I get that perspective. I do. I have a very strong anti-authoritarian streak in me, but it's not what's best for a city, right? Nor is doubling down on some sort of police state thing. We're lucky in that the Chattanooga Police Department has had a long history of community policing. And real community policing really, has to do with getting outside the department and working with other departments like community health and community development to take a really broad, holistic approach. And that's what we've done. And that's why we've had the results that we've had over and above having a great department. But look, I mean, you got to have a department where police and the community are not at odds with one another, where they realize that they are of the community, not over the community. And we're lucky we have that here. And we have to retain the best and brightest. It's like anything else, right? If you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys. We've got to have, and the same thing's true of fire. So it's really about retention for us, and paying for it is not going to be easy because this inflationary period has been extremely difficult, and we have this disconnect between, not everybody has seen the wage rises that overall inflation has spelled out, and so we in Tennessee we only have two levers to pull: sales tax and property tax, and we only control one of those levers over and above the general push for economic growth. The only thing we can do is control the millage rate on property taxes. And we've had 22% inflation in the last 5 years. So, we're trying to fit 5 pounds of flour in a 4-pound sack, and it ain't gonna be easy. So we're passing a flat budget, hopefully on first reading tonight. And then we're going to be coming back in a few months and saying, okay, well, look, we're willing to streamline departments. We're willing to make it work. But look, I got a lot of criticism for public safety not being explicitly spelled out in that One Chattanooga plan. A lot of people on the right were very critical about that. And the reason it wasn't is because I don't see it as strategic. I see it as the price of admission. If you can't provide good public safety, then it's like the hierarchy of needs. You're not going to get past that, period.
Can you talk in real dollar terms? What's a cop make in Chattanooga? What's a firefighter make in Chattanooga? And how much of an impact is this going to make on their lives and the lives of their families? And I'm assuming there's a housing component to this too. Now cops and firefighters can get some of that 11,000 units of housing that are going to come online.
Yeah, well, that's the affordable housing piece is going to be really important. We don't have anything specific for them spelled out. We're working on that now. I think, EMS, police, fire, teachers are the ones who we really need to, focus on here. But I mean, look, it's embarrassing, but they're making less than 50, both of them starting. Pay scales get super important on the civic. This is the one thing I've had to get used to in government is that it is just like large HR, and I'm used to running small businesses with 100 to 200 employees. And we didn't, in private business, if I wanted to give somebody a raise, I just gave them a raise, right?
Yep.
And, it's going to be, and I've figured out going down the line, skip a couple of business lunches, but it's not the way it works here. But these guys are due for another fairly significant, we did a big pay study and I had to give them a 24% raise when I came into office in 2021 because the prior mayor had let a pay study sit on his desk and gather cobwebs. And so, we're looking at hopefully nothing quite that large, but to get them on comp scale with other cities around us, it's going to be something on that magnitude.
That's a really significant pay increase. And I frame this up in part, Mr. Mayor, because I don't hear too many Democrats, especially, saying, "Hey, we're going to increase cop salary by 20%." Right? Like that's a message that I think most people would understand is necessary so you can get better quality talent, right? So you can entice people to leave, high school and college and pursue that as a career and afford to live in the communities that they serve. And the focus on strength, right? Like you're not coming at this with a milquetoast approach. You're talking about public safety as a part of the culture, right? A part of your overall philosophy. So I think that message, to hear it from you, the way it's packaged, really resonates in a way that you don't hear from politicians too often in America right now.
Well, that's sad if it's true, but look, they are a critical part. And the irony of it is that I think a lot of people don't realize, particularly on the left, is if you push your department away, if they don't feel wanted and loved and needed and appreciated, then no wonder, they act like they're out on an island and that they're not part of the community and they get this kind of, this hard shell, right? I mean, they're part of the community. They're a critically important part of the community. And, and so it takes both sides, but I think it's a big mistake for mayors to, demonize passive aggressively or directly their own police departments.
Mayor Kelly, can you talk about Trump? Okay, you talked about him a bit in your personal approach, but right now you're in a battle with him because they reneged on EPA funding that was pretty significant to Chattanooga, right? This is an instance where you had, $20 million or so that was promised, and now they're pulling it back. Can you talk about what impact you've seen so far from the Trump administration and these cuts that are happening, and your overall approach? What's going to be your approach as a mayor that's in the crosshairs on this, on immigration, on so many other issues? How are you going to deal with the Trump administration in these very challenging times?
Well, look, I hope we're not in the crosshairs. I mean, I guess because I am nonpartisan, I have good relationships on both sides. Again, I disagree with his leadership style fundamentally, but ironically, right, like I don't disagree with the disruptive nature of what he's trying to do in a lot of respects. I mean, again, like I know some of the people involved with the DOGE effort, one of whom, told me we have a marketing problem. Yes, you do, right? Like, I mean, the last time we went through this, we did it under Clinton and Gore, and it was actually the bullying and the approach is just not productive, right? I get that it's sort of red meat to a certain base, but be leaders, be the adults in the room, and be a uniter, not a divider. And so, I haven't made a practice of never taking stuff personally. And again, you have to just have this super practical approach. And on the revision of I think we're dealing with a semantic problem on the DEI stuff. I think we lost that grant because it had DEI language in it. DEI is not a Marxist conspiracy, right? I mean, I think if you sit and watch Fox News all day, you can kind of get hypnotized into thinking this stuff. And to be fair, there may be some people on the left for whom it is a wedge to their own political ambitions. But as a general idea, I mean, this project in particular was for the extension of our very successful Riverwalk, which brought incredible economic growth and quality of life to the region. And so it was, we just threw out the baby with the bathwater. I get waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, I think they ought to be focusing less on staff cuts, although in some places they may be appropriate, and more on the structural elements if you want to reform Medicare, there's a lot of dumb stuff we do with Medicare and Medicaid in terms of, incentive misalignment. I mean, that's the stuff that you need to be focused on. And, look, I have a lot of Republican friends. I have a lot of Republicans in my administration. I have a lot of Democrats in my administration. And you know what? We never argue because we always bring it back to what's the most efficient way to solve the problem. We need to, again, legislative politicians make red meat out of ideology because it gets them headlines and gets them on the television, but it's bullshit most of the time. And
So can you so to simplify all that, there was money for the Riverwalk, right? To redo this area seems like a no-brainer, right? Economic development. We've all seen these types of projects around the country, and they say there's a DIA piece of language in there, and they kill the whole thing and deny all the federal funding, right?
Yep.
And now what?
So there's an appeal process. We're appealing, and then we've got another project for a public housing project where they pulled some funding back, and we're going to find some local funding to keep it going in the meantime, and hope the fever cools. And look, if we can't pitch why that's actually really important, I mean, infrastructure drives economic growth, and if it's a bridge to nowhere, then it should be cut. It should be cut. But these are not bridges to nowhere, and I hope they do cut every bridge to nowhere. Right. But I mean, it has to be said also that, unless we address the two elephants in the room, defense spending and mainly entitlements, then we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic anyway. Right. And I mean, one thing that I was kind of excited about when Trump, announced his candidacy was, hey, here's a guy who's not afraid to say the right thing and do the right thing if he's convinced of it. We have got to address entitlement reform somehow, some way, and there are a lot of ways at it. But hopefully at some point he will see the light to do that, because until we do that, none of this stuff matters.
I want to ask you a question, if I can, Mayor Kelly, that I asked Yemi as well. You are a uniter. You're bringing people together, and at the same time, these divisions are manifesting themselves in so many different ways. Anti-Semitism, the fury around immigration, race, right, is probably an issue that we don't talk about enough nationally. Yep. And as a mayor, you're a white mayor. You've got a sizable African-American population. There are fault lines there. How do you approach these tough times where many people don't feel safe? In all different areas, and how have you as a mayor approached that? Yemi called himself the adult in the room. He's also, an immigrant himself, so he has a lot of authority. You're a businessman. You've made things work. How do you approach being the elder statesman for your city in these times where people feel unsafe and divided?
Well, I don't think they feel particularly unsafe and divided in Chattanooga, honestly. I think the city is different, and there are cities out there that are different. Look, as I say a lot of times, I try not to sort of double as a pastor. I was a religion major for a hot second in college, but I'm one of these guys who kind of rediscovered Christianity a little later in life. But I think Jesus was the first localist, right? It's not really complicated. Love thy neighbor as thyself. It's pretty simple. And if you really get that and understand it, then you don't have far to go. You really don't. I think a real problem though that I've come to understand is not a common realization, is that I read another. It's like a book club, right? But I did read another book that had a big impact on me called Thinking Fast and Slow. I think that book will come to be seen as much more important in retrospect. It's a super important book because it's essentially the foundation of behavioral economics, and one of the things that they talk about in that book, Kahneman and Tversky, is that unfortunately, it kind of trashes the typical model of classical economics, which is that we're all rational creatures. The really sad realization in there is that hate and fear sell better than love and hope, right? I mean, the human brain just responds better to those things. And we live in a world, and I don't have a better idea, right? I'm not suggesting we should go to state-sponsored media, but we live in a world where if I'm responsible for an ad budget and return on invested capital in public markets, I actually am not doing my fiduciary duty if I don't sell blood and guts, right? If I don't sell division, because it sells better than love and happiness. It does. And we've got to decide as a society what the hell we're going to do about that. Because that's really, I think, the problem. After I go duck hunting with these buddies of mine every year, most of whom are on the other side of the political fence. Of course, I'm on the damn political fence, but these guys are all, just watch a steady diet of Fox News. And I have to remind them, fellas, these guys aren't here to tell you the truth. They're here to have you tune into the next My Pillow ad. That's what they're doing, right? And I think Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly would tell you the same thing. So where they always drop back to like, look, this is entertainment, but people out there don't see it as entertainment, which is highly unfortunate. So as mayors, I always say we got to bring people together. Every time I get in front of a big crowd, just did it Saturday night, 5,000 people out there for a free concert. I ask them, like, turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself. You will find that you have a hell of a lot more in common than you do that divides you. Turn off your televisions and talk to each other. And whether it's, meeting people in restaurants, sports, it's one of the things I love about Chattanooga FC, the soccer team I founded. These things that are city-based, that bring people together, are critically important right now for our democracy.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm going to finish with that. And you've offered to generously stick around for a couple extra bonus questions for our Patreon members. Thank you to all our Patreon members that help us keep bringing this kind of content, especially being able to elevate the voices of independent leaders. Mayor Kelly, I don't know if you have a radio show, but you should, because I feel like we need these fireside chats where you take them to church a little bit and talk to the community in a way that's really important and powerful. People need role models right now. I saw you did office hours. That's a novel concept. Anybody in your city could just schedule a meeting and sit down with the mayor, but you're also bringing people together around the culture, and soccer has been a big part of that. You brought in a professional soccer team. I saw you've got a FIFA club from Auckland, I think, that's going to be staying with you guys in the next month. But can you talk about your vision and how sports brings people together in Chattanooga, and how maybe that can also be a model for the rest of the country as we near the Olympics in 2028, which is going to be in LA. We've got these other capstones where America's going to be hosting the World Cup as well. That's going to be important. But Chattanooga, again, a model on some of this stuff. That please share more.
Well, one of the things, there were a few things, of course, that eventually got me to get over myself and run for mayor. My experience of being a co-founder of Chattanooga FC, it was actually founded by like 7 guys. I was one of them. I was kind of the marketing guy. Everybody brought something else to the table, but it was fascinating, right? Because we all love soccer. I still play adult league soccer. I'm an old goalkeeper, broke on my fingers, but I still play with gloves on. That was the first time we did it, because it was a labor of love, and we loved the game, and we loved the fact that it was the world's game, and Volkswagen was coming to town about that time, and we thought, what a great way to welcome the immigrant community. And look, I grew up in the 80s when you basically were, if you were a soccer guy, you were like a communist, right? You were like, not that I didn't like football and baseball, but I mean, you were suspect at best. You admitted you were a soccer fan. But this was in the early days of Facebook, and which I'm no longer on, but so we used social media marketing when we stood this team up originally as an NPSL team, an amateur team, and man, like 1,800 people showed up to the first game, and then it was just off to the races from there. But what was super interesting, and I think relevant to this conversation, is that a lot of those people, and the people who became the core of our supporters group, who call themselves the Chattahooligans, which is really interesting because they're the nicest people in the world. They're not hooligans in the traditional British sense, is that they weren't soccer fans. They were Chattanooga fans. They were fans of this place, and the game and the event was just a conduit for them to express their love of this place. And so, look, our mission statement for the club has always been to use soccer as a tool to build community. And again, I'm still a shareholder. It's now an MLS Next club. It's all in a blind trust for me, but that is still our mission statement. And I do think sports play an important role, to bring people together. A vice mayor of Berlin said this independently, and I thought I was going to come out of my skin, at a strong mayors meeting we had, a strong cities meeting we had a couple of years ago, because it is a universal truth for sure.
Well, I think we've also shown the world that, America can do well in anything it puts its mind and culture behind. And now that we're doing that on soccer, I think we've seen it with women first, but now the acceleration has been really, really extraordinary.
Yeah, well, we need promotion and relegation in this country. I could do a whole nother podcast on that. If you really want to illustrate why the United States is functionally an oligarchy, just look at our sports system, where we let billionaires run the show at the expense of community connection because they just decide they want to move a team. I mean, what happened with the Raiders in Oakland? If that had happened in Europe, they would have burned Oakland to the ground. Not that they should have, but it's wrong. It's wrong. and again, I don't think it's unrelated to our current political crisis because, to be in a smaller market in this country is to be structurally disenfranchised in so many ways, right? And promotion and relegation, or the lack of it, is really a great illustration of that. We call ourselves a meritocracy, except when it comes to sports, and then we're an oligarchy, right? Like if you're not a fan of a team in a major market, then you're literally a second-class citizen.
Well, there's a real resurgence for small market teams that's happening in Chattanooga. We're seeing the NBA with Indianapolis and OKC to my chagrin.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
but also,
I'm a Knicks guy too, so yeah.
we also saw it in New York where, unless you have $2,000, you can't afford to go to a game. So you're at the epicenter of so much of it. Would you run for higher office? I know you mentioned it. I just want to ask you this final question. There's going to be a call for calm leaders, for thoughtful leaders, for uniters. Your star is going to rise. Would you run for governor? Would you run for Senate? Would you run for higher office, especially as an independent at a time where the country is looking for independent voices nationally?
I've said this before, and I'm not trying to be coy. I mean, I would never say never because I am, I believe in this country. But I'm in this job because I love Chattanooga. I love my city, and I've got a lot of work to do here to make it the city of its full potential. I'm just not a political guy, man. I'm just not, right? I'll never
That's
say
what
never
makes you
because,
good, man. That's what makes you good, right?
well, I mean, but to be fair, I have to remind myself, as other people have reminded me, I would have sounded just like this 18 months before I decided to run for mayor. So I'm not saying I would not rule it out. I mean, I think there are people that are better suited to it. I'd rather be sort of John the Baptist here than, and just help you find the right people and push them forward. I want to be of service. I have a heart for service. So I'm a fairly reluctant leader, but if I find myself, at that place, then I'm going to step to it for sure. But I think there are better ideas out there.
So it's not a no, which is good.
It's not a no.
Which
It's never
gives
going
us
to be a
hope,
no.
right? Because I think, we talked to Yemi last week, Pete Buttigieg in many ways, who's been on this show, is kind of 1.0, I think, when it comes to mayors. There's this next phase of mayors. And you and Yemi together on a presidential ticket, just as an example.
Wow.
Through the model, look at how you could bring people together, representing different parts of this country and different approaches. I think the country is starving for it. But in the meantime, we're rooting for you. We're rooting for Chattanooga. We're rooting for your soccer team. You give us hope and real leadership that we can look up to. So thank you for all your leadership. You're going to stick around for a couple extra questions.
Yeah,
but
thanks, Paul.
Until next time, keep it going, man. We got your back and we're rooting for you. We appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I hope now you understand why I am optimistic and inspired by the leadership of independent Mayor Tim Kelly. He represents a lot of what our movement is all about. If you want to learn more about him and his efforts in Chattanooga and his One Chattanooga plan, check out the links in the show notes here. And be sure, if you're not already, to watch us on YouTube, where you can join me on this walk around Lower Manhattan and see my conversation with Mr. Tim Kelly from his office in Chattanooga. And if you're a Patreon member, you will get extra content, including my conversation with Tim about soccer in Chattanooga, his favorite beer, his very first car, which is a very, very good one that you do not want to miss, and a great answer on the pancakes versus waffles question. Go to independentamericans.us for more, to join our Patreon community, to support this show, and to get some merchandise that you can still get in time for Father's Day. Father's Day is coming soon, and get some Independent Americans gear for the favorite independent father in your life, or for anyone else. All right, basketball season is almost over, and yes, my Knicks are out, and we've got a very, I think, interesting matchup in the NBA Finals. And I'm picking OKC to sweep the Indiana Pacers and the extremely annoying Halliburton and his father in 4 games. I'm also rooting for our old friend Isaiah Hartenstein, who used to play on the Knicks, and I think SGA is a pretty electrifying player. But basketball's not over yet. We've got the NBA Finals coming up. Check it out if you can, and I am picking OKC to win in 4. Yes, basketball season is almost over, and baseball season is now in full swing. My Knicks may be down, but my Yankees are surging, and maybe even more importantly, my little boys and their little league teams have only 2 games left, and my son's Iron Pigs have the playoffs this weekend. So it is a great time for baseball, which leads me to my one and only Rykoff's recommendation. Learn about the incredible and inspiring story of the Ukrainian national baseball team, which you probably don't know is touring America right now. They were in St. Petersburg, Florida, and last weekend they were on Coney Island here in New York to play a game at Cyclone Stadium on Coney Island. The Ukrainian baseball team won a 3-2 victory over the European team, and I went on MSNBC to talk about it. And we talked about how legendary former Mets manager Bobby Valentine joined them to support the Ukraine team as they've been touring America. It is inspiring. It is about much more than baseball, and my recommendation to you is in the show notes. Check out my conversation with their starting pitcher, Andre, from my segment today on MSNBC with Nicole Wallace. It's baseball season. It's a time to come together to enjoy summer and to remember the great American pastime, but also to remember how lucky we are simply to be able to enjoy and play the great American pastime. The Ukrainian baseball team is a reminder of what teamwork, courage, and inspiration is all about. And they are definitely my Rykoff's recommendation for this week. The future will be full of independents because independents are the future. We're uniting people of all backgrounds. We're putting country over party, people over politics. And if you're among the more than 50% of Americans that are independent, we invite you to join this movement and be a part of it. And of course, stay vigilant, folks, because vigilance is required and vigilance is the price of freedom. But know you're not alone in your vigilance. We're all vigilant, and we're all in this together. I'm your host, Paul Rykoff. Thank you for listening. Until next time, down with Hamas, down with Putin, Slava Ukraine, and stay vigilant, America.
Powered by Righteous Media.